So we're on skill number 7, and today we are talking about presence. And we debated whether we even include this one because I think it can feel very frustrating to get feedback that sounds like, it'd be helpful if you increased your presence with senior stakeholders or senior people across the company. And you sort of think, how and what does that look like? Or Helen and I were saying that sometimes someone gets pointed to as that person has brilliant presence, or you maybe even notice or recognize, well, that person has great presence, and then you think, and I'm nothing like that.
Yeah.
Like I worked for a boss who did have and does have brilliant presence. People were engaged by her, they listened to her, she brought people with them. But I was like, oh my personality is like dramatically different to her. But I can see how what she does works, because when people do have presence, I think people want to follow you. I think they want to be part of what you're doing. Your ideas have more impact. And so I do believe it makes a difference, but I think it can often start from this kind of point of being like, oh, but this is not me. Sometimes I think we can be quite fixed about our own abilities around presence.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's like it's this idea that you need to have presence like all the time. Like every minute that your day starts, you're like, hi, I'm Helen, I've got presence for every minute.
So what's your idea for action for this presence idea?
I don't know if you'll love this one, but my idea for action, the thing that I often think about with presence is face and space. Now, I can't change that much about my face. It kind of is what it is, but I can smile. And I often find in situations where I want to have presence is personal, but for me, a lot of my presence comes in my energy. That's kind of what I would bring to the room, or at the end of a meeting, at the end of a day or whatever, I bring that energy. It's a big part of my personal presence. And I think a lot of that is in my smile. It's a bit in my tone and my pace, but a lot of it is in the smile on my face. And so it makes a big difference. If I smile, you often, like the research proves, it's a bit like yawning. You're like more likely to get a smile back. So it creates a bit of connection. It always gives me a good start. I get that kind of feedback from someone that makes me feel a bit more confident. So face, try smiling. I know it sounds random, but just try smiling. And the second thing on space is, if you want to have presence, think about like your physical presence in a space. So for example, if I'm doing a presentation, a virtual presentation, I'm on Teams or Zoom or whatever, I will think about like, what does my physical presence look like in terms of the space that I'm filling? So am I center? I know this sounds really geeky and boring, but like if it's one of those moments that matters, I will make sure that I'm like in the center of the screen. I'll make sure it is well lit, or those sort of very practical things are taking my presence away. If there's something distracting, like Sarah gave me feedback on my background the other day. She's like, oh, the angle of your camera is a bit distracting because you can see that door and it's making me think, what's through that door?
Outside.
Like, I don't want you to think about the door. I want you to be listening to what I've got to say. I want to have presence in this moment. Probably not with Sarah, but she was giving me feedback I'm joking, more for other people. But I think to that point of sometimes you can't always see it because we so often operate on autopilot. I think getting some feedback on kind of your physical presence, like how do I come across on camera? Is there anything that would make my presence even better if next time I'm in that situation? Sometimes other people can see what you might not be able to for yourself. So it's useful to get a bit of feedback on it. So face and space.
My tip is to rehearse your start. So when you want to have presence, I think at the same time, you are often nervous or a bit anxious.
Agreed.
Or you're under a bit of pressure. Like I feel like pressure and presence kind of go hand in hand. And you are that last person on the agenda. Or you've got a lot of people that maybe you don't know, or maybe it's just like a high pressure moment, and you perhaps do feel quite stressed. And I think if you start well, it sets you up for success. When I say practice your start, I mean rehearse it out loud. So if I am doing something where I feel like it's one of those moments that matter, I will practice the first 2 or 3 sentences. How am I going to get into this topic? How am I going to start confidently and calmly and at the pace that I want to communicate? And then I'm usually okay. You started well, then I know roughly what I'm going to say. Often people also say ending well is important, but I sort of find the moment where I'm most likely to get wobbly, that you might even hear it in my voice, or get distracted by something in presence-wise, because I don't know, I do start twiddling my rings or whatever, it's the start.
Yeah. And
so really just focusing on that first 90 seconds. There's also quite a lot of evidence around people make snap judgments, unfortunately, which, perhaps we should try not to do. But if in 90 seconds people feel reassured or energized by your presence, or you've kind of drawn people in and they're like, oh, this is good, I'm going to enjoy this, I'm going to listen to what she's got to say, then you've captured people's attention. So I think you just don't want to miss the moment in an important moment. So I still do that now. I'd still practice now how I'm going to start.
And we think that this is a really good twin episode with the one on presenting, because very often, like the presenting and presence, just like the pressure point, they kind of go hand in hand. So that was one of the ones we did earlier in the sprint.
So if you want to watch people with presence, I would encourage you to watch some TED Talks. Now that might sound counterintuitive because you think, yes, but for TED Talks, they've rehearsed 200 plus times. That is all true. So you should remember that. But if you watch the TED Talks with the most views, like the top 10 TED Talks, a lot of those were from the early days of TED. And they aren't shiny and they aren't perfect, but those people all have presence. You've got Simon Sinek with a flip chart,
That's true.
Old school flip chart. You've got Brené Brown, who shares that she turned up to do her TED Talk and I think she was like late, she'd rushed, she'd written some of it on a flight. And so those people all have presence. They're also very different. So it's not like there's this sort of cookie cutter approach to presence. Usually it's people being authentic, kind of bringing themselves as something they care about. So I think it's a good place to start for remembering there's no perfect presence.
So that is the end of today's skill, and we'll be back tomorrow with judgment.